Good afternoon and thank you for joining us today. It's 3 p.m. and we will begin our webinar. My name is Nancy Trivette and I am the Director of Curriculum for Agricultural Science Education, also known as CASE, which is managed by the National Association of Agricultural Educators. I'm also the President of ACTE and based out of Richmond, Virginia. This webinar is one of a series focused on planning for COVID-19 impacted school year. And we are looking at that school year through the lens of ACTE's high quality CTE program of study framework. Today's topic is standards aligned and integrated curriculum. How do we continue to deliver rigorous standards aligned curriculum that is meaningful for students in an environment that has changed so dramatically due to COVID-19 pandemic? It's a difficult question to answer and one we will be exploring today. As we begin, let me express thanks for the work that each of you on this webinar are doing to keep our schools open, safe, and effective as possible during an extremely challenging time. We realize that it is a stressful period, and we are hopeful that this webinar series will be useful and a support to you. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. I will introduce them in a moment, but first, a few directions about how we will conduct the meeting and how you can interact with us today. First, you may notice that we're using Zoom webinar, which is different from the Zoom meetings ACTE has used in the past. Zoom webinar allows for more participants and has some different features that I'd like to explain. We'll be using the Q&A feature for questions. The mics, participant video, and chat features all have been disabled due to our large crowd. Please type your questions into the Q&A box. I think you'll find this feature easy to use and more efficient than the chat feature. We strongly encourage you to share your questions throughout the presentation as our panelists and ACT staff will be responding to them during the event. We also encourage you as attendees to share your answers to questions as well as in cases where you may already have discovered solutions or best practices. You can also share any resources that you have in the Q&A box as well. Just type in the web links and share the information just as you would in the chat feature. It doesn't have to be in a form of a question. It can be in a form of a useful resource. If you're experiencing any tech challenges, please use the raise hand feature in the participant box. Someone on ACT staff will be responding to help you. Brandy Handress is with us today and will assist from ACTE. Next, I'd like to ask Catherine Imperator, ACTE's resource manager, to provide a few opening remarks about ACTE's high-quality CTE program of study framework, which this webinar and the entire series is built upon. Catherine, welcome, and we look forward to your comments.
Thanks, Nancy. So thank you all for joining us today. I just wanted to provide a little bit of framing for today's event and this entire webinar series. The series is organized around ACTE's Quality CTE Program of Study Framework, which hopefully you've seen before. We released it in 2018 with 12 elements addressing different aspects of CTE programs of study, from the fundamental classroom components of curriculum and instruction and assessment to critical experiences like work-based learning and CTSOs, as well as issues of access and equity, career development for students, and other topics. And we're also doing sort of a soft launch right now of a 13th element called systems support, which addresses what has to be in place on the broader systems level to support quality in all these other areas. We've had a few previous webinars in this series already, with many more to come. And we're releasing a guide very soon on CTE planning for the coming school year with a variety of suggestions and guiding questions and considerations as you're making your plans. So I just want to talk a little bit more particularly about the standards aligned and integrated curriculum element. So this element addresses the multifaceted nature of CTE curriculum, including the technical standards and competencies, of course, but also the academic standards and competencies and employability skill standards and competencies that are all developed through CTE. Also the development and review of curriculum in partnership with industry, and having space in the curriculum for student application and practice of what they've learned. So that's just a little overview, and now I'll turn it back over to Nancy.
Thank you, Catherine. For those of you not familiar with ACTE's high quality framework, I urge you to take a look at it and the growing number of resources that ACTE has made available on the website at acteonline.org. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the day. Our first, Dr. Rohan Jowallah, Instructional Designer, the Center for Distributed Learning, the University of Central Florida, Orlando. Good afternoon, Dr. Jowallah.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
And secondly, Justin Touchstone, Senior Program Quality Manager, Engineering and Technology Education, Idaho Career and Technical Education, Boise, Idaho. Justin, welcome.
Thank you, Nancy.
And finally, Scott DeLuke, Arts and Technology Instructor, Capitol High School, Olympia, Washington. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Nancy.
And welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining to share your knowledge and expertise with us today. Let's get started. I'll address this first question to each of our panelists. As you begin to look ahead to the summer and fall, what is the current situation on your campus or in your state or in your school district? Have you reopened to serving any students in person this summer? And have decisions been made about offering in-person, blended, or remote learning for the fall semester?
Okay, I'll start, Nancy, okay, thanks. Thanks for having me. As a matter of fact, when March, the pandemic started, we moved our courses online at UCF. The summer remains the same and it's going online. And as the university considers reopening, we are thinking about having a blended flex model in our approach for fall. This will ensure that students and faculty are kept safe at the same time delivering the content and courses as we speak. But we do have a consistent update on how things will look for the fall. So it's ever changing. However, if we do go back in the fall, it's going to be different in the sense that we're going to have a high flex blended approach to our content delivery and courses.
Nancy, in the state of Idaho, like many other states, I think our school district shut down in March, and it was a variety of offerings. Some schools continued on and offered online content and kept kids accountable for their grades at the secondary level. Some schools did enrichment activities and allowed students to kind of go back and make up any missing or late assignment or missing assignments or low grades assignments. So at our division, the Division of Career and Technical Education here in Idaho, we spend a lot of time supporting our teachers in this online format of how do they get kids instructions, and I think that's what the State Department of Education in the state of Idaho is looking at, trying to get districts to consider that hybrid model in the fall. And I think many districts are looking at like an alternating schedule, kids coming back on A, B days. Half the kids will be in the school buildings, half the kids will be at home learning online. So right now there's no concrete or solidified plans for the state of Idaho, but there's a lot of discussion about a hybrid system in the state of Idaho for this fall.
Thank you.
The state of Washington has a similar approach. Our superintendent for the state said that there will be face-to-face instruction in the fall, but how that looks, and it's definitely going to not be our traditional model. With following the health department's directives, there'll be many modifications to make sure it's safe and appropriate. And each individual school district, ours included, gets to decide what that will look like. And we're figuring that out as we speak. And so we're expecting blended learning, some type of distance learning kind of put together. And again, if we have to lock down again, or a specific building has to go to complete remote learning, that we're ready for that. So we're retooling for that expectation.
I think the common denominator here is, number one, as this whole thing has rolled out, the change, it's hard to predict, almost a week away, let alone at this point 2 months away. And so I think the common denominator is that everyone is preparing for an alternative of any number of different directions, or a combination thereof. And so I think that's kind of what we've been hearing. As I ask the next question to our panel, I want to remind participants that as we ask the questions, please feel free to put in the chat features potential answers to the questions, as well as they may be different than what we're seeing hearing on the screen, but that you may be able to bring some new and different information to our group and to our webinar. And also remind you, if you might have some resources or web links that you've used or you know about, feel free to put those in the chat box as well. So with that, the next question has multi parts to it, but we'll try to take them little pieces at a time. So initially, many schools and post-secondary institutions are discussing changes to the instructional calendar, either starting and ending at different times, or using blended approach to learning. And many have contingency plans for the possibility of moving back online if the health situation warrants. How will this affect affect how you structure curriculum and content sequences with individual courses? So what are we doing now to get ready for that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we have to be very flexible at this point in time. And I've been saying to the faculty that I support that flexibility is going to be the key for our success. As an instructional designer and someone who also teaches online, I've been guided by the fact that we have to sequence content in a way that it's going to be looking different at this point in time. So I stress the importance of course alignment as you're going through the alignment of your course, because I think you have to think about sequencing in that context. In addition to this is the aspect that we have to make drastic changes if we are in a face-to-face component and we're required to make that transition. So I'm saying at this point, there's no longer single modality that course might operate in the future, but within a flexibility framework. So therefore, I'm recommending faculty to be flexible in a manner that allows them to make that modality change if needed. You know, for example, if you do go to a high flex model, you might have to the ability to have these courses that require, for example, lab to use that sort of flexibility that gives students the required engagement necessary. And however, I'd like to say making this transition rather is not going to be something that you have to do immediately. So therefore you have to really plan. So I think at this stage we have to be flexible. Our approaches have to be planned out. So when we are required to make the modality change, we can do that without having to go through what we saw in March. Over to you.
Thank you, Rohan. Justin, you want to go take us next?
Yeah, I know here in Idaho, a lot of the districts are looking at changing their academic calendar. One, to be able to front load what kids missed this spring. So they're looking at starting earlier in August with their courses so that they can kind of back teach what was maybe missed or do remediation for students, so that as they enter into the typical school year, kind of end of August, 1st of September, you know, those kids are at the point where they should have been had this not happen. The other challenge that I think a lot of them are looking at is making sure that their semesters are ending or their trimesters are ending right before the break, so that they can extend break periods, so that if there is a flare up in COVID cases, that they have a quarantine period kind of built into their semester. So that's kind of the model that a lot of districts are looking at here in the state of Idaho to kind of help get kids caught up and then to manage it if there's a flare up. I know at the post-secondary level, they've implemented staggered times for labs to be open if kids need that hands-on instruction time, but it's very limited students in there. So they're letting 5, maybe 6 kids in at a time to work in the lab spaces after the instructional, online instructional pieces. But they have to follow all the current safety guidelines and everything else as they're in there. So it's changed that whole lab structure, and our instructors have been awesome. They've spent extra time at school trying to make sure those kids can get through and finish up their semesters. this last year. So that's kind of what we're looking at in the state of Idaho as our model moving forward.
Justin, just a question to follow up on that. What is your normal start date for school in the fall? You're muted. You're muted.
Yep, sorry. Normally they start anywhere from like the last week of August to maybe the middle of the last couple of weeks of August, kind of right in there. They usually typically start. Some start in September, but most of them start that last week of August.
Okay, great. Scott, so you're in the classroom you're probably thinking through this every day, like what will I do if? So tell us what your plans are.
Well, what drew me to this webinar is I imagine if this is the destination for a student and we start here, if we used to walk down the hall and step on every tile of the hallway, we're being asked now to like basically jump 2 or 3 tiles or more. What are the core standards that have to be addressed for them to be competent so that we can move into any type of flex? So to answer the question about scheduling, our district hasn't nailed down any changes of time that I'm aware of yet. We're going to stay with the same school year structure. It's just having lab access, almost like a collegiate level experience where kids would go in for lab time potentially and have pockets of time to do that with a distance learning or a space supported model, so that there's only half dozen kids in a lab or something like that. But looking at these different scenarios and how we can best support them. But the first part is, what do we want? What specific standards are most important, and building things around that so it can be flexible.
Okay, great. So Justin talked a little bit about some of the concept of front loading some of the information based on what occurred or didn't occur in the springtime. Any thoughts around that, Johan or Scott?
I think that is quite good to consider, because I think you have to think about deficits that might have been gained over a period of time, and we have to find remediations for those. And I think that's important to have the seamless movement towards any modality that we have to go forward to. So I would say that as educators, we need to make that transition. But however, we have to think about what was missed in the process. So I think good quality teaching using your framework should make these connections.
Great.
And I would say that the front loading, there's some core skills that it would be wonderful if kids had. The irony being, my students have blogs. They publish remotely. Most of our work can be done offline already. And when our school district announced it was shutting down, I was actually at a conference across the state, and I drove back at 4 in the morning to be there on a Friday to talk to the kids and say, you have this. Publish your blog, read our schedule, watch my tutorials, which are videos I make, and we will collaborate using Zoom. You have this, you're dialed in. And so having kids prepared for that and just reminding them that we can do this. But they already had the skills to use their blog, to work remotely. They had the tools, and it took quite a bit, maybe a few weeks of front loading at the beginning of the year to get kids up to speed with that. I'm afraid for this coming year, how am I going to do that? How am I going to get them to that point? And so coming up with strategies this summer on how to give them the tools remotely so they can work remotely. We'll see how that goes.
So that brings really a good question. And Scott, you probably touched on this maybe in your earlier comment, but how do we determine which standards can most easily be taught through remote instruction and which would require in-person practice?
You throw them all in a hat and you pull out random ones. I'll back off and we can be a little more serious about it.
Well, and I'll just say that in some of our programs and some of our content areas, sequencing is so critical from a safety standpoint, from a delivery standpoint, from a content standpoint. Some things can't be done today if it's not supposed to be done until next semester. So I'll leave that, let the experts answer.
So Nancy, I know here in Idaho, we had a law passed this last year from our legislature that said everything can be taught online, and it was very broad. And so we've been starting to look at how does CTE fit within this new law and this new framework that we have to deal with. And the rules are still being written, so we don't have board rules or state rules yet. So we're working through that process. But what we did here in Idaho to kind of start this conversation with our teachers, and I think we're going to revisit it this summer, but we sent out all of our standards. So we spent the last 5 years developing robust standards with industry, both for technical standards and workplace standards. And so we put all those into a survey, and we sent them out to our teachers saying which ones can be taught online, which ones can't be taught online, what ones, can the whole entire structure be taught online? So we asked them a series of questions, and we got that back. And this was just before everything happened. And so, the teachers' framework and mindset was, oh, I'm going to be a face-to-face teacher. And now their framework and mindset is, well, maybe I have to be a hybrid or an online teacher. And so now I have to change my thinking. So we're going to actually go back to this survey and kind of revisit it with our teachers, saying, okay, now that you've been through this online process, let's look at the standards again and say which ones are critical, which ones can we do in an online format and meet the marks that we need, and which ones just shouldn't be offered online, because if you're looking at OSHA 10 or other safety things like that, well, there's some things there that just you can't do in an online format, in an online environment, and you have to do it in a face-to-face or find a new way to do it. And so I think that's kind of how we're starting to approach our standards in our state. And I'd be more than willing to share kind of our survey questions out. It was a pretty simple survey, just these are the standards, what ones can do it. But hopefully as we look at that in August, we'll have some additional information as we go forward with our teachers on how we're going to approach this fall.
Okay, thank you, Justin.
My feedback on it is this is going to be a go-to answer. And I was joking with my advisory committee that whenever people ask me questions like this, I right away say, well, I would talk to my advisory committee. And I actually did that. I took the questions that we're using today and pitched them to the advisory members, and they jumped on and added quite a bit to it, which is really nice. The point being, looking at industry representation, community, families, and what are our core human beliefs. And the reason I bring that up is 21st century skills. The way we talk about it with our group is if there's a line here, and imagine maybe it's like a line of water. When you go through, the way people are seeing, I don't know if I'm going left to right or right to left here. If you start off and you want to be competent at the end, every step of the way, every activity, development component you're working on, above the line is the core technical skill. Below the line are 21st century skills. And there tends to be quite a few more below the line, almost like an iceberg. And so each activity, like being on time, being a good team member, following through, quality in your work, versus can you edit the video? It's like, well, yes, but you're hard to work with as a team member. So we look at what the most important things are along this line and double down on those and say, can we do that with Zoom? Can we have people work asynchronous on it? How do we work through that and say, what are the core things that somebody in industry is going to need to have? Then put those in that timeline and double down on the 21st century skills, because that's really the common denominator for all of us.
Yes, I'd like to add to that, because from a higher education perspective, I think it's important to know that faculty do have the ability to make these decisions regarding standards. And I think UCF faculty have been very instrumental in really evaluating what goes online and what skills that might need to be taught face-to-face. And they've been very proactive, because I think there are some elements. For example, I was talking to a faculty today, and she had an experiment that she wanted to annotate. Normally she would annotate those things in the classroom, and then she would review students' work at the same time, and students would compare. And she had to go through a different mindset to really accommodate that sort of skill set within her online course, which she ended up allowing students to take a photograph of what they've done to upload for her visual. So we have to really think of outside the box. And another thing that I'm thinking about is there's some stuff that has to be done face-to-face. For example, you're in a computer lab and so forth. In a science lab, you might have to have that component. While there are other supportive online apps and so forth that can help that transition, it's important to really consider what standard need to be taught face-to-face and what standard can go virtually online, and what can, for example, what can be used within a extended reality framework. So we have to really think about these things as we make it, because at the end of the day, we want students who are engaged in higher education to have the competency necessary when they graduate from that degree that requires that external accreditation body signature on their approval. So I think that's important to think about. As you think about what you can teach online, you have to think about, from a university perspective, the accreditation bodies that govern these professions that these students will go into.
So that's so let's just say we determined which standards that should be met in person or virtually. Well, now how do we measure them? How do we determine if they're met? You know, it's
one of the things I've been looking at. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article on LinkedIn because I think one of the key things we have to now look at what the COVID pandemic has taught us is that we need to use different modality for regarding assessment. So we normally use a traditional of a sit-down examination or a teacher feedback, but we have to think about if we want to assess that, we can have students do, for example, a video presentation of what they did, so the tutor or academic person can look at, they can engage in a longitudinal sort of project over a period of time to meet that assessment. They can engage in a writing research paper on a topic. There are so many things. So we have to kind of diversify the way we're thinking about assessment, because no longer can we say to ourselves, you know what, I'm going to do the traditional approach, because the traditional approach practically caught many individuals off guard. So they did not have the technology to support, for example, a simulation evaluation could now be done online for nursing rather than going to the physical environment. So I'm thinking we really have to change the scope of how we approach things from now on, because if we do not, then we're limiting the scope. So I think we have to really diversify the way we assess. And I think having these traditional new thoughts can help in the assessment, as I indicated before. For example, I'm working in an institution, and the student said the other day, I have no access to the data because of COVID, you know? So therefore we had to think about another way. Let her write an extended review paper to acquire that credential that she needs. Over to you at this point.
great. Thank you, Johan.
One thing I'd like to interject about physical equipment and some of the questions that are coming up in the question and answer section. I teach a class called School of Rock. And if you've seen the movie, it's kind of like that. We bought guitars for kids with the help of my CTE director. Nice job, Pat. Woo. Shout out to him. We bought the guitars plus a connector device so they can connect on a Chromebook at home. And all students in our district have Chromebooks as a bare minimum. So we're hoping that if they have a Mac or PC, that'd be slightly better. But the idea is that in my class, we can do the theory and the knowledge-based components online or remote. That works pretty well. But when they have to have fingers on strings and actually do something, we wanted to get them a physical device. And then what they can do is record into an online system. We use Soundtrap for audio. We also use YouTube for demonstration. So they would play in front of a video and post that onto their class blog. So the idea is they're building a portfolio and getting kind of experience of building up a portfolio and learning skills over time. So that's one thing that we're trying is can we get certain devices and get them out so that we're prepared for the push and pull that's going to be from blended learning to completely back distance learning if we have to in the fall.
So Scott, I think that was, you must have been reading my mind, because I was going to ask a follow-up question, which we had not been, we had not seen earlier. And that was, what new technologies are we now needing to use, must use, already using? And you described one that was fairly content specific, but even from, Johan, from an assessment standpoint, you know, we have to look at things differently. And so what are some of those technologies? I'd be interested to hear a little bit about that if you had any thoughts on that. And Scott, I think you're the concept that it's going to be content specific in some cases.
Well, what I think when we look, for example, at new technologies, for example, we already touched on video, we can use that. And there are so many other things. I would like to touch on the use of virtual reality, extended reality at this point in time, because there's a new emergence of knowledge and technology being used in that field that I think at this point is moving from the gamers to education. So if we embrace that technology and invest wisely, we could have a lot of support at this time, because, for example, individuals can engage in field work through virtual reality, and they could make connections there. You could have, for example, someone visiting a museum, for example, but still having that connection, not taking that risk. So there are many examples that I could cite at this point, but I think extended reality is going to be a part of the game. And if we do address and utilize this going forward, we can cover a lot of competencies based on this, from medical field to to nursing, to so many other fields that we can cover at this point in time. So I would embrace the use of extended reality to avoid what we're going through in making some of these assessments at this point in time.
You know, Nancy, one of the challenges we have with the need and for all this new technology here in our state, we are a very rural state. I mean, we have pockets of urban areas, but for the most part, we're a very rural state, and not every district and not every kid has access to appropriate devices. I teach an online drafting course, and the kids were fine as long as they were at school and had access to a school computer. They could handle AutoCAD, but as soon as they moved to their home environment, the ability to access the needed software, to access a computer that could handle the software, it was a challenge, and some of the students just, you know, they couldn't meet that challenge. So I think that's one of the pieces that states are going to have to figure out how they're going to address that. And, you know, and I don't know if that's money from the CARES Act or if that's stuff through Perkins, or, you know, I don't know what that looks like, but I think for Idaho, that's one of the biggest challenges of having to deal with an online hybrid system. I know school districts, some of them are just printing off the lessons and having them picked up at the door so that parents could have, so kids could either have a hard copy or they could have an online copy depending on what their situation was. And so there's, you know, I love the idea of virtual reality and augmented reality in education. I think it's a great place to be in the future. I think it's where things are going to go. But how do we get kids to have equity? You know, I think equity is a key in this whole thing, that some kids, you know, we don't want to leave them behind and we want to bring them forward. And how do we do that, and how do we meet that challenge? I think that's one of the big unanswered questions in our state, of how we're going to address the technology needs of our students.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm going to just go ahead and say that connects well to really the next question, which is, you know, how do we determine if particular standards need additional review or reteaching, either by those who maybe didn't learn the standard or the concepts in the springtime? You know, what will we be doing to get them ready for this next school year? Is anyone doing any summer catch-up time if, in fact, they actually can get together with students, which by the looks of the way the numbers are going across the country, probably not, but how do we determine those additional needs?
I think one of the things that we have to really make the assessment, and I'm looking from a higher educational perspective, we know that many things went on a couple of weeks ago, and now we are required going into fall to be proactive. And I've always said at the start, and I've made a recommendation from a higher education perspective, that is to have this, what I call a knowledge inventory. And what I use a concept knowledge inventory because I saw one of my teachers using it a number of years before. And it's just asking students to give their level of understanding regarding a concept or principle, because you want to ensure that these are concretely understood before moving to or venturing into other areas. So I think you have to really assess students prior to their learning engagement before you can actually begin to teach the content. So I think that's going to be imperative at every level, whether it be K-12 or higher education, to have this sort of understanding of the knowledge that students are entering, and kind of ensuring that these gaps that have been created because of COVID-19 pandemic are addressed in a meaningful way and supportive way, of course.
Okay, let's move on then. And again, I want to remind the participants to, the chat, the question and answer looks pretty active. And so hopefully we're able to get some good questions out there, as well as some answers, maybe of things happening around the country. So again, participants, if you have responses, feel free to put those in there as well, and as well as resources that you may be already using or know about to share. And while we're doing that, staff will be continuing to try to keep up with those questions and replying. So, but back to the panel. If campuses are open to students, they are likely going to be implementing a variety of social distancing strategies, such as keeping student workstations 6 feet apart and so on. How do you think this impacts curriculum? And have you thought about how you might teach employability skills, particularly communication, collaboration, and teamwork in a socially distanced manner?
I'll jump in on that one just because something we've been working on. This last year, we started what we call a session. A session is essentially a month. We have week 1 pre-production, week 2 production, week 3 post-production, and then week 4, the students present to a professional panel in the classroom. We bring in advisory members, they sit in the back. The students come up, shake their hand, go to the front, make a presentation, and prove that they have done their specific job for the production. And I teach game design, School of Rock, and film cinematography. So all of the courses revolve around teaming and working collaboratively to produce something. The advisory committee, we've been talking about doing this in Zoom, mimicking certain things. So instead of shaking hands, there would be a greeting, there would be a professionalism that is brought across. Now, it's not 100% of what the shaking hands and making eye contact, but we're trying to replicate it as much as possible, but on a monthly schedule. The kids will be working remotely using teaming programs like Trello. All of the software I teach is now free and available online, or there's similar systems. So we teach game design, but there's also free versions of gaming software that you can use, like Canvas. So looking at opportunities for kids to collaborate remotely and then prepare presentations like Google Slides, then present them to our professional panel through Zoom. And actually advisory members like Zoom better in some respects because they can more actively participate more regularly instead of having to leave where they are. And some of our people are professionals in LA or far flung, and they can now chime in. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a practical example of one way we're looking to address as much of the professionalism as possible.
So I'm going to follow up with a question on that for you, Scott. And you talked about, obviously, in all of our career tech areas, and specifically some of our CTSOs, we have taught the importance of a firm handshake, and obviously looking someone directly in the eye, which is easy. But I don't know, should we be still teaching that firm handshake? Maybe there are other ways. Other cultures have different ways of greeting people. There you go. So we may not be teaching handshakes anymore.
Well, it's ironic because I was speaking with one of our, like I said, I'm going to sound like a broken record or a skipping CD or a corrupt MP3. I just did 3 different generations for the same thing, trying to broaden my horizon. One of our advisory members in game design, incredibly gifted person who gives us way more time than we deserve. He mentioned yesterday that when, I want to put this properly, your word choice, for instance, teaching how, now I'm being really self-conscious, like I want to choose the word wisely. They shared with us numerous ideas on word choice. So the idea, instead of just the firm handshake, to be deliberate about word choice, less ums and ahs in particular, better diction, things like this that they can focus on that help them grow as an individual. And the idea is in a distance learning, if you're going through a job interview virtually, how do we prepare for that? Mm-hmm. So as you had just said, things have changed a little bit. So how do we adapt to still have the student put their best foot or image forward to be able to represent themselves well? And the idea is they're focusing on it and deliberately planning to be prepared for it. And I think that's the most important component, whether it's a handshake or controlling your voice, saying 3 things and then being quiet, different techniques like that.
Thank you. Social distancing, how will we address that?
My wife teaches at the high school, and she has a class. She teaches seniors in their senior project and they call it High School to Life. So it's preparing seniors to go out into the world outside of education and on to college or whatever their next step is. And we were talking about her classroom, and she's like, I may have to have all these spaces between my desk, and then just how do we move in the hallway, because you're in Idaho. It's a school of 1,600, so that's good size for Idaho. I know in some states it's a tiny school, but but how do you move kids around? And I don't know if they've come up with a way, and that's why they're looking at double shifts or every other day, and only feeding X number of kids in the cafeteria. But I think that's part of the flexibility of education, that we're going to have to just kind of navigate these waters because they're all unknown. And this summer, we're going to actually sit down with our teachers at our summer conference. So we bring all the teachers together in the state of Idaho, Well, this year we're going to bring them together virtually, and those that can travel, because Idaho is, we're allowing some smaller gatherings to happen at this point. But we're going to sit down and talk about best practices in the classroom. So how does this look coming into this fall? So because they're already being asked by their districts to prepare lesson plans and concepts for this fall and submit them now. So teachers are begging for information. So I know that we're going to try to help them navigate that the best we can at the division level. But again, we're a local control state, so that's some of those decisions are made at that district level, and that's what they're going to go with. But it will be different for sure. I don't think it'll be a normal school year to start. And maybe the new norm is we don't teach a handshake. I'd hate to see the handshake go away, but maybe for the next few months or next year, it's fist bumps and elbow taps or air high fives or whatever that is. But yeah, the new it will be challenging, and I think the beauty of it is we've seen it here in Idaho. Our teachers step up to the plate, and they're more than willing to try to be flexible, and they're more than willing to try to learn how to be good teachers online. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges is we've had teachers who just got thrust into this whole new position of now you're an online instructor when they're so used to face-to-face. And they've had to challenge and change their teaching methodology, which I don't think is terrible. I think that's a good thing to look at how we do the practice in the profession of teaching. And if it changes and it gets better because of this, then that's a win for us. And I think that's the positive that we have to keep in mind, that this is raising our teaching profession up and helping us to better what we do, and not to just be stuck in the same, hey, this is how I've done it for 25 years in this face-to-face format. Well, I have to change that now. So I'm looking forward to seeing how other states deal with this. I think it'll be interesting to see. Idaho doesn't have any answers, but we're working on it.
Okay. Rohan, how about your campus?
My campus has been working proactively to address this. As a matter of fact, in March, April, they started training individuals to use Zoom, and they have been consistently developing their training practices. Currently, we have an essential of teaching online that is going to be running, as a matter of fact, it's in operational now, that will train roughly over 300 faculty to enable the high blend flex model that we intend to implement. So I think we have been proactive. Regarding social distancing, we have several committees at UCF ensuring that they are safe, their guidelines and information is disseminated both to faculty and students to ensure that they understand the nature, to the point that they have even bought roughly several thousands of masks to ensure that faculty and students are safe. So they're addressing it proactively. So when it opens up, we hope that it will be a blend flex model, high flex model rather, of getting those who need to come on campus and have labs and so forth to ensure that they can do their lab successfully in a safe environment, and those who need to be home and can work in that modality can do so. So I think it's important to address this. And another point I'd like to make is, as we look forward, it's going to be flexible, it's going to be changing, and our president at this point continues to keep us updated regarding any changes. And I think we are moving forward because the guidelines are going to be in place to ensure both staff and students are safe. And another essential part is that the Center of Distributed Learning that I work at, we have been proactively working to support faculty online, because many of the faculty have to make the transition to teach online when they have always taught face-to-face. So we have been working diligently to address the needs to ensure that there's continuous quality in the teaching and learning process that goes on at UCF. Regarding social distancing and the skills, I think I see the physical distance as needed, yes, but I think there's so much to learn from as students collaborate online and professors are more engaged. So I see it as a new sort of future that will emerge, and there's going to be a lot that we can learn from this, because I think students are collaborating online. They're studying using Zoom, they're having their breakout sessions and so forth. And it's a learning process. However, some of them have said, I still need to see the physical campus. They're missing the campus. So at this point in time, I think that hopefully when this is over, we'll have the best of both worlds, a blended sort of learning environment.
Yeah, so I just, you've triggered so many times, all of you, some of my thoughts around this. So I will share a little bit of ag education with me, because that's my roots. So back 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, there was a nationwide initiative called Reinvent Agricultural Education for the year 2020. And we visioned what it thought it would be. And we talked about at the time, my goodness, there'll be a student will have a computer, each a one-on-one, one for one. Every student will have a computer. So we thought about that and said, how can that be? And we visioned a lot of different things. Well, we got to 2020 and, things really weren't that different across all of education. Here we are 2020 and, did we really reinvent that much? And then suddenly March hit. And all of a sudden, nothing in March was anything like it was in February. And we just reinvented everything that we did and will continue to do that. So Rohan and Scott and Justin, I think you all said this, our key is to be sure our students aren't going to be not using technology less in the future. They will be using everything we're doing today and more. So yes, a handshake maybe, but definitely, Scott, teaching them how to interact in an interview or in a work situation. Everyone's working from home, so they're going to need to know how to do that. That's what the new teamwork concepts are going to be around, how to work as a team virtually. So I think you've all talked about a little bit about that and appreciate that. I'm going to move on. We have about 13 minutes or so left, so we have a couple of questions left. You probably addressed the one regarding how do we modify curriculum standards and when certain technical skills are meant to be executed as a group. I think you all talked about that a little bit. Again, I know that in my world of ag education and specifically the curriculum for ag science education, part of what we do in that is have kids work together in teams, lab skills and develop skills that they'll need in the industry in a team concept. So I'll just stop in case there's something else you all wanted to add to that one. Can we provide these experiences through a distance learning when in fact they need to be working in teams? So I'll stop there and let you try to answer that before I go on to the last two questions.
Well, I'm going to jump in real quick as Flani, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. I apologize in advance. Has a question in the Q&A section. And kind of a statement too, and I want to talk about that because it kind of dovetails. We are using Trello, and if you're not familiar with Trello, it's basically you make tasks, put them in a board, and you can collaborate. We collaborate in the classroom with this. We also use Scrum, which is a small teams efficiency activity process, and that has been really effective this year in the classroom. The neat thing is that Trello can be offline. And so a number of teams were working on a game competition here in the state of Washington during COVID, and they were able to collaborate with Trello. And I subscribe, they have me as a member on the board, so I can see the activity. This also touches on what Tim is talking about having uniform platforms for districts, the state, et cetera. The idea of that if I'm a student at home and I have 6 different teachers and they're all doing different platforms, that's kind of crazy. So figuring out Schoology or Google Classroom or whatever system, colleges are a little more advanced with this because they have platforms like Canvas and others that they are using. But for us to decide that, I think is really important. And then look at the collaborative potential with the various tools. And a lot of industry leaders are already using this. So for instance, Trello, their teams are far flung all over the world. And they have their meetings through Trello and using Zoom. And it's very effective. Their business model is to work that process and to support people, and they use it for themselves. And I think that's really helpful. And then one other question that came in the quick Q&A that I want to touch on is that I'm going to be offering summer school July 5th for School of Rock, and I'm going to take the greatest hits of what I'm picking up from these types of conversations and try them out. They asked us to have some FaceTime during that. So we're going to see how that goes. And I think, as was said, I think Lisa put in here as a comment, there are going to be families that just don't want their kids to be physically in a room. And I think that's fine. I think it's a matter of having the capability or having that option for the students who do need that or want that and seeing how that works. And I think that will be something we kind of roll with as we, move into this.
Good, thank you, Scott. And so I'll just go ahead and again, you've already touched on some tools. What other tools might have been, that were most effective in the springtime or that we should be considering for a remote environment for the future?
I know a lot of districts here in Idaho have used Microsoft Teams, kind of similar to Trello, where students can collaborate together. They can set up a classroom. They can meet right through Teams, and have that advantage of learning how to do this. Because I think this is a great tool for kids to learn, because I think it's going to be what they have to deal with in the world of work going forward. So I think Microsoft Teams has been another one. I know my wife is a Schoology trainer here in our local district, so she's been doing a ton of trainings through Schoology. But she and I both teach online, and I like to use a platform called Loom to make screen capture videos and teaching tutorial videos that show my mug and my background as I teach drafting, because drafting online, it's really, sometimes it's just showing the kids how to kind of process through the software. But those are tools that I've used, and I know that others have used that online collaboration. Anything that we can find like that. We've actually put together a resource page on our CTE, Idaho CTE website for all of these different resources for teachers to start tapping into as we hear about across the nation. There's Skills USA stuff, and there's a lot of other things. So we've been trying to help our teachers. Hey, here's a slew of things to try out. Try them this summer, see what may or may not work, and then let us know so that we can continue to help each other grow.
Yeah, one of the things that we used at UCF and we're using today is Zoom, and I thought that was wonderful for us to engage in that. And I realized that using Zoom and others using Zoom, we have to really have thought about the pedagogical affordances of Zoom, when to use Zoom, when not to use Zoom. So I think those are important issues that we have to consider. Individuals are using Zoom, they make the assumption that everyone has a webcam. Not in all cases. So we have to consider these things. You have to consider that individuals will require an internet provider. Sometimes we make these assumptions. So it's always good to realize that while Zoom is good and other modes of communication, we have to really think about the gaps that these can create, because this is new technology for some students, and not having access to these technology or internet providers could create a problem for them at this point. So I think those are things that need to be considered.
Yeah, definitely. And I was on in a conversation recently where it was recommended that not only, to use Zoom for the session that they were involved in, a hardwire to their internet would be more helpful than trying to go through Wi-Fi. So just little things that maybe help it get smoother, but then again, some people don't have that access. So having had a lot of great conversation with a lot of great ideas, and the Q&A session looks like it's being well used with lots of questions and links and comments and responses. What other issues should we be thinking about and talking about related to this topic, which we've not yet talked about today, or that we need to start thinking about in order for preparation for the next school year? So what are we missing? What's been on your mind that you think that we're not addressing? We in general in education, and maybe in ACTE.
I'd like to start off because I think this is very dear to my heart at this point in time, the issue of inclusion and diversity. So as we plan to use Zoom and other modes of technology, I don't think we have given serious consideration regarding the inclusivity of these mode of technology that we are using. So compounding the issue of the COVID pandemic is the issue that we have special students with special needs who need accommodation, and sometimes they're not taken into consideration. We make assumptions, include myself at times that yes, we're going to be using Zoom, but I've not consider the individual with a hearing impairment, so to speak. So I think as we go through, we need to take some level of reflection on ourselves to say how accessible are these new and emerging technology. For example, you notice I spoke about extended reality. I have my limitations regarding that because of access and because of possible individuals with accommodation not having access. So I think as we go forward in this challenging time, I think we need to consider the learners and the complication that they might have in this time, because the landscape of education is consistently changing. And as it changes, we need to consider those with special needs and those who have potential barriers that can limit their access to curriculum.
Well said, Rohan, well said. What else should we be doing, Justin or Scott?
I'm just reading some of the question and answer comments about just to get access for whether it's a learning disability or a physical limitation when it comes to not having internet. How do we create, well, first, identifying the core. What, as a community, what do we value the most? Simplify, build our skill sets around that so that we have young people that are going into the community that have the skill sets we value the most. Cut away the BS. The BS in our world is busy stuff, you know, and then focusing on that. What if you have to drive into the parking lot of one of the schools so you can get on Wi-Fi? We have that going on in our district, that we have that possibility. So we're trying to create as many dynamic situations. So we have a good homeless population that's part of our school district, and we want to make sure that they have access to material. We have Wi-Fi hotspots that are being checked out. So it's a matter of really focusing on creative solutions to problems and getting kids supports that they need, and focusing on the core. When we say the core human beliefs, what do we believe about education? And then the next step would be, so what skills, standards are we going to prioritize? And then how many different ways can we imagine to show competency? You know, for somebody who could create something and turn it in, and either in a virtual way or a physical way. So.
Thank you. Justin?
Yeah, I like to echo what everybody else has said. I think one thing that has been highlighted is the gap between our students in our state. You know, those who have access to things, and you know, federally we're to provide an equal and accessible education to all, and that has been an extreme challenge. And I think, you know, we need to be mindful of, you know, homes that have multiple students and parents who are now maybe having to go back to work. And you know, if we're in an online environment and students are supposed to be held accountable at home, but mom and dad are working because it's a two income household, you know, are those kids going to be able to get through the traditional kind of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G? And I think, you know, Scott and others have hit it really well, that we need to kind of rethink what are the core pieces that they need to know to move into that post-secondary. And we've talked about this within our office of, you know, maybe we need to rethink our standards some to have that the bottom triangle be just those foundational elements, you know, getting kids to be showing up to class on time, to be accountable for their work, to, you know, have a pencil and paper available for working, or, you know, whatever those core skills are. And then, you know, that deeper technical training happens up at that post-secondary level at a higher level. If we can produce kids that go into the post-secondary that are ready to be there and ready to learn, I think that kind of changes that a little bit. And then we kind of move away from some of the heavy technical stuff in the secondary realm. But access to devices and access to, you know, curriculum, you know, we had parents going, we're not going to drive to the school and park in the parking lot. And I'm not going to sit there for 6 hours with my kid while they do their homework, because I have to work too. You know, and then you get home, you have 5 kids, 2 devices, parents trying to work. It's a whole new ecosystem of education, and you know, I don't think anybody's come to the conclusion of the right answers yet. I think there's still a lot of unknown things out there, but equal access is the biggest one that I can think of. Kids who have special needs, kids who just, you know, 504s, IEPs. I mean, there's a lot of things to take into consideration so that we don't unfairly hold down kids who just, you know, they just have those extra challenges, and we got to be mindful of those guys and those kids, and make sure that we lift them all up. Education is supposed to bring all people up, and so that's where I think we need to be focused, is making sure that we're elevating everybody together.
Well, thank you. And that probably does wrap up our webinar. So I would like to say thank you. We'll say thank you to our panelists for sharing your expertise and ideas about this important issue of system support. I wish you the best as we collectively work to prepare for the 2021 school year in whatever form that takes. Please remember, though, everyone on the webinar, that ACTE is here to serve and support you. We hope to see many of you back here as we continue this series on COVID-19 and the high-quality CTE program of study framework through the month of June and July. We also plan to release a guide as a companion to the webinar series, and it will be available later this month. We hope to continue to hear from our CTE educators, administrators, school counselors, and all other professionals who are working to support students through this difficult time about your successes, challenges, and needs for support. I can't help but say thank you to Leanne Wilson and her staff at ACTE for quickly adjusting to the changes and helping to deliver quality content to our members and educators across this country. Don't forget to visit acteonline.org for many other resources that are both connected to the framework, as well as other resources that will help you during this COVID-19 pandemic in regards to education. There's just a multitude of information and resources there. Thanks again to the panel. Please tune in for another one of these webinars in the future. But to everyone, please stay well, stay healthy, and stay safe. Good evening.